Okay, well, um, I'm back, and okay, we're gonna do that again then. So as long as there are no questions, and I can't see any here in the chat, I'm gonna talk about the. So actually, since we're starting over, let me just start over completely. So welcome to this live. The idea is that once a month I do a lot Q&A in English for people on the student tier, especially the people who don't speak Portuguese. But of course, Portuguese speakers are welcome to do this, to participate here as well. Although I'll be speaking in English. I did this live open because I believe I still have very few students who are only English speakers at the moment. So we'll uh, uh, we'll be doing that. People can send in questions in the chat, and I will be discussing while the questions don't come in. I'll be discussing a thread I posted on Twitter yesterday, which is about daimonis. So yeah, I wonder if I can share that screen. And let me, I'm gonna try sharing the screen of my uh, thread, which was about Daimonis. We had a nice conversation with Edward Butler about it. Um, so, window capture, window capture. Okay, select the window. Okay. Okay. Oh, cool. Yes, we've managed to do this. So just reduce myself, increase the window here. Yeah. Okay, I think you can see it now. And oh, good morning, Peter. And so yeah, feel free to ask questions. Oh, okay. So questions are coming in. So the idea of history of philosophy is archaeology of ideal objects. Yeah, that is, so yeah, that's an idea I developed, in part because while I was at the Hebrew University, I was at this interdisciplinary, postdoc, and I had contact with a few archaeologists, and yeah, it was something that I came across. I mean, I've tried to search to see if other people have phrased it in similar ways, but as far as I can tell, it's kind of proper, peculiar to myself. So this idea that, I mean, the general idea is common enough, right? So in history of philosophy, sure, like we do something basically different from history of ideas. So a philosopher working in the history of philosophy will be very interested but very frustrated with Francis Yates, Giordano Bruno, and the Hermetic tradition because it gives it. She just follows certain motifs, certain as it were, intellectual motifs through the author she studies. She doesn't really ever analyze a single argument in that book. So she more tells a narrative about how certain ideas took shape and developed, and petered out. What's interesting for the philosopher, however, isn't so much to tell a story about ideas, but to reconstruct the ideas themselves, the concepts, judgments, arguments, debates, systems, right? And it's analogous to taking out something from the ground, and then you dig it out from many layers of dirt and rubble and so on. The same in that same way, we take out these ideal objects from layers of text and interpretation. And the same way that the archaeologist, sifts through and and stratifies his dig. We sift through the text and we stratify, the many layers of interpretation that this text has gone through, and that allows us, to think critically about our interpretation, what we're getting from the text. Um, and also, it is part of the archaeologist's job to not just, take it out of the ground, but then to try to figure out, what did this mean? What was its use? That also is true for the historian of philosophy. And because of that, the narrative part isn't entirely um, alien to what we do, but the center is really the um, is really making these ideas useful again. And I'm very strong about this, that I think that we can, in some degree even, I think we can think the same thoughts, right? Especially when we're dealing with things like mathematics or highly mathematized areas and enterprise in philosophy like Proclus's Elements, where we could really do an archaeology that allows us to think the same thoughts again. And that's like, and these thoughts can be far more useful than objects discovered in archaeological digs, even though objects discovered in archaeological digs can, have important role, for instance, in the arts, for instance. So okay. So thanks for the question, Estevan. And we will people are feel free to send in a new question. While that doesn't happen, let me get back to this uh, post of mine and the thread that followed. So the um, I tweeted, there are fewer daimonists than transmigrating souls for Proclus. We don't reflect on the consequence of this theorem enough. So Proclus argues for this in Proposition 203 of the Elements of Theology, right? Where he writes, in the multitude of souls, psyche, the divine ones have are are greater in power than the others, but they are concentrated as far as their number goes. The Those that always follow the divine ones are have hold a middle position in the order, both in respect to power and in respect to quantity. And the partial souls, they have an inferior power than the others, but they have proceeded to a greater number. Right? That's a spontaneous translation of mine here on the fly. Um, so, so that clearly, and so those that are partial are those that don't always follow the gods, and those are the souls that give life to us, right? I have a whole spiel about how soul is a bad translation for psyche, and I prefer just to say life or immortal life. We don't need to get into that here. And the um, and so the what what did I draw from this? It's that so those that always follow the gods are the daimonists, and those that only are partial are those that only occasionally follow the gods, that are those are ours. We are only occasionally are in the heavens living a divine life. Most of the time we're down here, giving life to one mortal body after another. And so that undoes this idea of the personal daimon as just as it were a a spirit sitting on everyone's shoulder. There isn't a one-to-one correspondence here. Rather, I argued that this must be the case that it's only human beings who have a a personal daimon in that sense. Souls that give life to animals don't have personal daimons in that sense. Why? Well, Proclus and Salistius both say that the rational soul that animates an animal has the same relation as a daimon does to a human being. And so it would be redundant to say that there's also a further daimon on top of that. Also, that corresponds to Plotinus's theory in NEN 3-4. So where he says that the daimon is always something one up from the living being. So if you live according to your appetites, your daimon is rational. If you live according to reason, your daimon is nous. If you live according to nous, your daimon is analogous to the one. And so that means that for rational animals, for human beings, it makes sense to have a daimon in the strict sense, which is the strict sense that Prox is speaking of here. So, which is a psyche, an immortal life that always participates in a nous, right? It is actually just a life that embodies a nous. If we think of different noes as different sciences, like I don't know, like engineering or siege warfare, the biology of a particular the biology and like including the ecology of a particular living being. So we can think of the noes as these separately existing metaphysics or pieces of knowledge, bodies of knowledge. Then the daimones are simply these lives that are nothing but implementations of such pieces of knowledge. And it can be the case that therefore, um, um, each of the daimonists is inherently noetic, and therefore only human beings, which are rational animals, have a daimon. Whereas the irrational animals, they don't each of them have a daimon. What they have is a rational soul, and that says that as their superintendent. And it, and so that was the beginning of the thread. Let me pause here to take the question from Clássicos Rebaixados, representing the esoteric Shevitism in the chat. So, how do you think modern forms of polytheism can be justified in the face of questioning about the historical rupture of tradition? Meh, I find this, oh, I don't really find this a problem. I mean, the world is divine. The aspects of the world are divine. Um, I think there are nameless gods, right? There are gods that don't even have rights and myths and names. And so certainly there is no they are not dependent on a tradition for us um to worship them or to have access to them. So, for instance, what do I mean? I mean, the example I'm constantly using in this debate, I had this long debate with Edward Butler about it, is the sun, right? So, of course, when we say that the sun is a god, we do not mean that all of matter out there in space that we can imagine sending a probe out there to it. The idea of the sun as a god is more something like the the universal structure of our experience that we call like the year. That includes all the yearly cycles that we observed out here. So things like seasons as well. And also, yearly cycles of human development and plant development and the development of living beings. I mean, that's the idea of the sun. It's the year. And also, as the source of light, like what is light? Light as as it were, the most basic form of perceptual knowledge, being the origin of sight. This is, the sun as it appears to us, right? The sun doesn't just appear as some separate thing in the sky. That separate thing in the sky is actually, as it were, the greatest symbol and the marker um, of all these other processes and these other phenomena to do with the year and with cognition. Um, and it's true that there are many solar gods in different cultures, right? So, Ra and Helios and Apollo and Sol and Sol Invictus. And so and let's say even, like Jesus Christ is the son of justice. Um, so there are Shamash, right? So there are many solar gods. However, none of let me- mhm. However, there is also the nameless God of the sun, right? That we, as it were, we can triangulate them by observing them as it were, the common node between all these solar gods. And this node itself is divine because it's a universal structure of experience. It's part of the fact experience is only intelligible, right? And we can think of experience in a wide sense here um, as experience as appearance in general, anything appearing to anything else. But so experience has many conditions for it to be intelligible. Like, for instance, there has to be time and space, and time has to be ordered, and there has to be cause and effect, and all these many things are not reducible to one another. And one of the structures of experience is this irreducible structure that we call the sun, right? And in English, and then in Portuguese we say sol, and in Hebrew we say shemesh, and in French we say soleil, and so on. So this this structure is divine as being a ground of intelligibility. As a ground of intelligibility, it is itself beyond is itself not reducible to intelligibility, and it's something more simple than that. It's simple unity, and so so there are such things, right? And these nodes are divine. The revealed God with their myths and rites and so on and names, those are also divine. But they, um, the divinity here is not a competition, which means, therefore, that the historical rupture of tradition is not a problem. There's, you know, even for the traditional gods, let's say, the gods which have myths and rites and names associated with them. They revealed them once and they can continue to reveal them, and the lives of their worshippers now are part of that ongoing revelation. Um, um, would would that be like a sort of theology of qualia? Well, it's not qualia. I'm not reducing everything just to sense perceptions or to like what it is like to see that or something. Um, I'm talking about structures of that make the appearance intelligible. Not sure why I would call that a theology of qualia. Um, so my term for it is transcendental polytheism or phenomenologia, right? Which is what I've been calling it as well. So um that's basically my answer. Okay. Let's uh let's carry on. I'll carry on the discussion of Daimonists while other people send in new questions. So I got to this part where I explained that human beings seem to have daimonists, individual daimonists, whereas the rational souls that go to give life to animals don't. Now let's complicate the picture a bit. And say, and bring in shepherds. So shepherds are daimonists that take care of different groups of living beings. So entire species, but also lower things. So let's say if you have you can imagine that there's one roving group of birds of a single species of bird. It's not the whole species, but it's one family that, reproduces and so on, and so it's independent. So the individual birds die and reproduce, and so the group is always changing, and yet it maintains its own distinct. It maintains itself in time, and also it um, has its own distinct individuality. Let's say distinct from the whole species. And that is explicable for Proclus. This regularity of the group is explicable by the presence of a daimon of that group. And and of course, there are daimonists for the whole, for total species as well. What is um, going on here then with the fact that also each bird has its own rational soul? Well, the rational souls that become birds have become birds because they became irrational for Proclus. We can get into the perspectivist problem later. And the irrational souls then they are required because we we need a separate self-moving, self-changing source of life for each living being. So there has to be one rational soul for each of the birds. However, since they can only give life to the birds by acting irrationally, that means they can only do that by going against their nature, which has to be something in some degree accidental or a fluke. It's not something regular, right? However, the existence of the birds is regular, and therefore they need a regular cause, a common nature, a species nature, or a clan nature, and that's given um, by the so-called shepherd of the group, the daimon, that is, let's say, the science of that kind of bird, right? And that is it's like a big bird, right? Uh, Big bird, not like Sesame Street, big bird like Big Pharma. Um, and so it's the science of that, but it also maintains that in existence and maintains the conditions for that in existence. So why then? And so there's a different sense in which maybe here we have many rational souls under a single daimon, right? Which is another way of solving um, the difference uh, in numbers, right? That's what Edward suggested here, right? So Edward said, "Are we certain of this? It would seem to contradict the myth of Ur." We had some back and forth about that, but then he said, "Why should we infer from this that there are souls without a superintending daimon, rather than that a single daimon superintends multiple souls?" And then I answered, "Well, the account in the thread ends up admitting that, insofar as the beasts, the hypothesized group not to have individual daimons for their souls, do still have shepherds. But certainly if you share your daimon with many others, your life will be less individual, right?" And so that would be a sense in which we get many souls having the same daimon. Now, this is actually, however, in tension with another idea on the thread, which is, however, an idea that I'm quite excited about. Um, so, um, like the the general problem of that there being fewer daimonists than transmigrating souls is that daimonists have like a lot of functions in Proclus. And in general, in Platonism, they carry prayers up and down, and they're shepherds of different groups, and there are daimonists of cities and nations, and there are daimonists dedicated to punishing souls beneath the earth, and there are material daimonists that drag us down, that want to drag us down into material ways of life. And so, like, there are all these different functions, and there are fewer of them than us. Like, what's going on? So, we need to, as it were, telescope many of these functions. And in the thread, I go through many proposals of how to telescope them. And so here is the one about, and I have one of these ideas is about this idea of cities, right? Um, where did I put this? Um, uh, so here, this certainly requires identifying some of these functions, like the personal daimon of the ruler is the daimon of the polis. So that's an idea I had. So the daimon of the polis, right? So the same way that there's a shepherd for like a group of animals, there's a shepherd for a group of human beings, because also by Proclus's theory, most human beings act irrationally. So there's a problem about how, you can have a natural city, right? Following Aristotle, it's natural for human beings to form cities and even bigger groups. So, I mean, not for Aristotle, but I think believe for Proclus as well. Things like ethne are also natural groups. So um, yeah, um, so there are these bigger groups. And there are also then shepherds of these groups. Right? So, for instance, it's the daimon that explains why everyone in a certain city has common habits, common language, a common, as it were, customs, written and unwritten laws. So this is really like the god of the polis, right, or something like that. And it occurred to me that so this is like what gives unity to the group. And I thought it would be elegant to say the person who's destined to rule a group is the person who chooses that um, daimon as their personal daimon, right? There's some sense in that because that is actually the true ruler of the group, as it's what keeps it all together and united. And that's actually the Platonic idea of politics, right? The statesman is the one who unites the city, right? He's the weaver in the dialogue statesman, and so that would be very nice. And so we could think of each person as which who rules a certain group. So like uh, or not who rules a certain group, who has the vocation to do so, right? And it could be that is it who has the vocation who actually rules? Because the diamond that we choose is actually he determines what our life will be like. So it is actually the person who effectively rules it. Now, of course, there are many ways to rule, and it could be that, for instance, the unity of a group is given not by its king, but by its poet or by its priest. And so there are different ways of thinking about that. But yeah, and it could also, and this also maybe explains in some sense, for instance, if we think of a smaller group, a much smaller group, like a family, um, that someone like let's say the dominant figure in this family, be it the father or the mother, is someone whose daimon is the very daimon that unites that whole family, right? Um that makes sense. It's like the clan daimon. We have ideas about this, right? Of like reincarnation of ancestors. Um that makes sense. So that's like one idea I had, but then that enters into a bit of conflict with this idea that the shepherd of, for instance, geese is going to be the personal daimon um, of all the rational souls that have chosen to be geese. Um, and not just as it were the head goose. Although maybe then we need to get into more detail into like what is proper about human political formations and what is proper about animal communities, and maybe details about that could sort itself out. So that's just an idea. Um, another other ways to so I'll continue developing these ideas about Diomedes while we wait for more questions in the chat. And um, I think I'm just gonna do another 10 minutes because I only plan to do this for an hour. And this is unfortunately, of course, the first 20 minutes I didn't have audio, but anyway. So let me go through this uh, uh, thread in order. Right. Um, I wrote, so what is distinctive about humans is that they pick a life. Their life is a narrative woven into the cosmos. The individual lives of beasts, however, are not prescripted, just their species life, it would seem. This might be unfair to beasts, but you can take this as a purely formal way of defining humanity and beastliness and generalize it across species. So that's one idea, right? There's this problem about the speciesism in Proclus, right? So he thinks that vicious people become other animals, and we need vice in order for there to be other animals. So I talked about this on other occasions. And so, however, there's this perspectivist idea, right? That actually every animal sees itself as human beings. And therefore, we can say that every animal has is a fitting receptacle for rational souls. They've just chosen to lead, as it were, in some sense, not incommensurable lives, or rather, yeah, in some sense, incommensurable lives, right? They're lives with, radically different um, values, and therefore they manifest in radically different bodies, right? Something like that. And so these are, the different, and therefore there are rational souls everywhere. But then, what to make of the difference between rational souls and beasts? Well, maybe rational souls are just the ones within any community, human or non-human, that have an individual prescripted life, whereas the beasts here are those that just live the gregarious life. They are, so to speak, NPCs. Of course, there's this problem now, of course, that, okay, you've given up um, on the speciesism, let's say, but now you have this elitist talk about like the people who have truly authentic individual lives versus the NPCs. Um, and then, we can get into arguments about going back and forth here about, well, this seems to describe a certain amount of our lives, but, it can be used like as a moral philosophy. It seems certainly wrong. You should treat everyone as unique. There's problems here. So that's one thing that I sketched out here of this might be unfair to beasts, but we can also take this as a purely formal way of defining humanity and beastliness and generalize across species. The formal way would be to say human beings are, a human soul is a soul that has its own daimon, right? Now, another way of taking that is something I did in a quote tweet, which is here. But if we don't do this, right, if we don't generalize the quote tweet, if we don't generalize the idea that um, to be a human being just is to be a rational soul with its own personal diamond. If we keep that, human beings Homo sapiens here, if we see human beings Homo sapiens here, then this raises an interesting possibility for the question of anthropomorphism. What if the human form is actually the daimonic form? And here we have this picture of Mercury here, and the and so that's the idea. So like maybe if that's the case, then maybe the import of like anthropomorphizing gods is in within Greek religion for Proclus then would be that this is actually the way that daimonists properly appear, and that's why we have this form. It's because each of us has our own personal daimon. That would actually really match with daimon being, with Eros being a daimon, right? And and then that would be the um because of this role of the personal daimon in explaining erotic connections, right? So part of the um it, Proclus sees that the ideal romantic erotic connection is that between Socrates and Alcibiades, and Socrates is playing the role of personal daimon to Alcibiades, right? And if we think of the human form as actually the the daimonic form, then we can understand also why it is considered beautiful and erotic and attractive to us, because it is, it's actually, as it were, an imitation of what a daimon looks like. And what we really want is to be reunited with our daimon. That's actually like the original sphere of Aristophanes. Um, so Classicus Hebaishavs asks, would ancestor worship then also be the worship of the diamond that brings these ancestors together? Yeah, so there's a question about ancestor worship, right? So, how do you reconcile ancestor worship with reincarnation, with transmigration of souls? Because, for instance, if you take a classical account of ancestor worship, you go and you burn the fire and you take care of the tomb because the ancestors are there. If the souls are moving on, then why would how is that taking care of the ancestors? Your ancestor might be in China. Like, what's going on here? Um, and recently I came across an interesting articulation of the two in Afro-diasporic religions in Brazil, reading a text by Reginaldo Prange, where he talked about how um, uh, in the communities he was studying, I think there were Yoruba communities, that um, you worship the ancestors and you keep their memory alive because otherwise they don't have the chance to be reborn, right? Only who is remembered can become reborn, can transmigrate. That's an interesting idea, and there's some plausibility as to the mechanism here, that if someone doesn't exist in memory, then they don't even exist as it were, a possible life that a child can mature into and fulfill that life, right? So that's interesting, although like that's not very Neoplatonic in the sense that it attributes too much agency to human beings, too much responsibility for us to be responsible for keeping daimones around. No, that's certainly not, or souls around. Souls are have separate existence independent of what we do. We can't kill people by forgetting them. Um, so how do we do this? So yeah, I think that part of the idea for Prox is that worshiping the ancestors is actually worshiping the clan daimon, certainly. And I think that's certainly part of it. Oh, and we know that or we have reason to suspect that there is some in principle solution to this, because Marinus tells us about how Proclus himself engaged in ancestor worship, right? And um, so there should be some kind of solution here. Um, and so that's one solution, is to just say that. But there seems to be not enough, right? You'd think that you're still thinking addressing those specific souls. So I'm not sure what to do about it. Um, it could also be like one solution is to say, your true ancestors are those other souls that belong to the same God as you, and that's who you're actually worshiping. And and then you worship them no matter where they are, right? Um, and that might be a solution as well. But I'm not sure. Okay, so this was a nice first experiment of a Q&A. I have two other classes today, so that's why this is only 1 hour uh, in time. I guess this might have been too early for the English-speaking populations of the world. But anyway, there's a new Neoplatonic Virtue class today. And um, and I also have the and I also have my Seminário de Fenomenologia today. I look forward to seeing some of you back there. And so all this will be on YouTube, and I hope to be doing these Q&As once a month. I'll just take this one last question by Conrad. So, greetings, sir. I have a question regarding the postmodern conception of reincarnation Neoplatonism. Can it be rejected while still being Neoplatonism with fundamental metaphysics? Yine. I think it might require some tinkering. I think in some sense, I think it might need to be rejected, not entirely rejected, but I think it needs modification because it's dependent in part on this idea that that species never die and that the world is perpetual. And it doesn't agree with what we know physically about the history and development of life on planet Earth. And so I think that and so I think it needs tinkering certainly. Um, but I do think that there are good reasons for it. So for instance, it's part of the reason for thinking that we've lived past lives is that something like mathematics or philosophy shows that we are free and um, shows that we are free and that we are actually self-changing immortal lives. But that means that even this life, even the given conditions, the brute conditions of our life, our body and like the family we're born into, that too must be chosen. And like, on the basis of what could you choose that? What could give you a ground to choose between different lives? All the choices that we make are within a life. How could you choose a whole life? We have something like this because of major life decisions, but that nothing compares, right, to the just absolute start of birth. And I think it's first, and it's the best explanation is that we've had a previous life, right? It's other lives that give us the ground to choose the next one. So that that is um uh that is like the rationality for saying that we have had previous lives. And that's also the reason for saying, for instance, that we not only have, a succession of lives we transmigrate from, but also that we have celestial lives, lives independent of transmigration, universal lives. Because if we always only choose the next life as a reaction to the last life we lived, right? So I don't know, you lived in a perfect city and that made you lazy, and so in the next life you choose to be a tyrant. Leading life as a tyrant makes you have a miserable life, and then so in the next life you choose to be a peasant, where a simpler peasant that's not, and then you're always reacting to your next life. Then we're not actually free souls. If we are free, immortal lives, self-changing, self-determining, we have to have an innate and proper criterion for choosing lives. We have to actually participate in some kind of higher life that is, a cosmic, perpetual, universal life. And so that would be the celestial life that we have in between cycles of transmigration. And that's the sense of that we are sewn into the souls of the cosmos. So there are good reasons for this, for these post-mortem doctrines. They are reasons connected with the analysis of us as self-changing souls, and which seems a very robust part of the Neoplatonic metaphysics. And so even though I think that needs to be tinkered, I think that tinkered with because of questions about the perpetuity of the world and perpetuity of species, I do think that it has to be part of the final picture we get anyway. So that's it. I'm going to leave this recording for like a couple of more minutes because of the lag, but that's it. This was a nice uh, first attempt at a Q&A live. Thank you for